네, 오늘의 마지막 세션입니다, 여러분. 불과 1년 전만 하더라도 코딩이라는 단어조차 생소했었는데요. 지금은 교육부에서 과도한 코딩 선행학습을 단속하고 있을 정도로 많은 분들이 뜨거운 관심을 보여주고 계십니다. 바로 이 코딩 교육을 유럽에서는 교육 기부로 해내고 있다고 하는데요. 오늘 강연의 마지막 순서로 이야기를 들어보고자 멀리 아일랜드에서 연사를 초청했습니다. 소프트웨어 교육 기부에 따른 코더도조의 비전에 대해 강연해 주실 구스티나 미조니 코더도조 전무님을 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
Hi everyone. I think the downside of going last is that I'm just going to say a lot of what has already been said. But anyway, I am here to talk to you about CoderDojo, which is a global movement of free programming clubs for young people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why coding and more broadly computational thinking is important, the importance of the informal learning sector in this, the tools and supports available in the CoderDojo model as a whole, and hopefully by the end of this, I'll have inspired some of you to go and start dojos in your community. So why is this important? And we've heard from lots of speakers throughout the day about the importance of learning these skills. But from a CoderDojo perspective, one of the quotes that we tend to use is that children should be programming the computer rather than actually programmed by it. And this is a quote by Professor Seymour Papert, who is one of the pioneers of this movement. He wrote the famous book, Mindstorms, Children, Computers, and Powerful Ideas, and he was also one of the pioneers of the MIT Media Lab, where Scratch, the visual programming language, ultimately came out of. There's lots of random animation in these slides, so excuse all the clicking. Another perspective on why it's important is the industry perspective. And from an industry perspective, corporates and lots of sectors need technically skilled employees. Technology is becoming more and more integrated with our everyday lives, and therefore it's imperative that we have a generation of people growing up who actually understand technology and can build it and influence it. This quote is from Mark Benioff, who is the co-founder and CEO of Salesforce.com. And we have partnered with Salesforce to help spread CoderDojo around the world. And he says that coding is probably the most important skill that you can acquire today, and that it is critical for the fourth industrial revolution. So I wanted to tell you a short story about a young girl who comes to the dojo that I run in Dublin, and her name is Sarah. And she has been in the Dublin Docklands dojo for the past 2.5 years. And she joined when she was 7. And she is one of those children that you don't come across very often, where they actually have an incredible natural aptitude for coding. It just comes really easy to her. Her brain is programmed that way. So it was really amazing to see this wasn't a skill that she was learning in school. She had played with Scratch a bit at home, but she had never met other people who were also interested and passionate about building things with technology. The photo on the left was her at the Coolest Projects Awards, which I'll come to later, but this was a project that she built using Scratch, and it was a simple world quiz game. It was great, and she came runner-up in that category. The thing about Sarah, though, is that she had really low confidence. She was really shy. She was really nervous. And any time at the end of the dojo, we'd always encourage children to get up and just say what they were working on, and she would never do it. And I always really tried to encourage her because she was so great at it, and I thought it was really important for children to see what she was working on. But it took about 18 months of her attending the club regularly to get up and actually say, this is the project I've been working on. And she's still coming to the dojo now, and she has improved her confidence so much. The photo here on the right was from October just gone, and we do an annual event in the European Union's Parliament in Brussels, where we bring children from CoderDojos all around Europe to the European Parliament to teach their local MEPs, their members of European Parliament, how to program. And Sarah came along to that event this year, and at the end of the session, she got up in one of these big European, it looks like, you know, any government chamber, and joined me on stage and presented the project that she had been working on. And that just shows you the evolution that any child can go on by learning and developing their confidence through something like CoderDojo. The second project that she built that she's showing there was using a tool called App Inventor, which also came out of MIT, and it is a bit more complicated than Scratch, but you can actually use it to build Android apps that you can then have on any Android phone or tablet. In terms of the global skills gap, we all know that we are facing an unprecedented one. There is regularly reports talking about how the lack of skilled people choosing to study computer science or similar at university level. The regular figure thrown around in Europe is that there's going to be just under 1 million, there's going to be a shortfall of around 1 million technically skilled jobs by 2020, and we're not very far from 2020 now. The other interesting statistic is that 71% of new jobs in STEM, so in the science, technology, engineering, and math sector, are in computing. The 45% figure is around 45% of executives have stated that hiring enough technically skilled people into jobs is one of their critical challenges. And if anyone works in industry, we've hired developers even into the CoderDojo Foundation, and it can take months to find the right people to fill the positions, and it's hugely competitive. And in the US, there's going to be 1 million unfilled programming jobs by 2020. But CoderDojo doesn't exist to create the next generation of programmers. Our purpose and what we care about is much deeper than that. And we believe that children should be learning how to be creative, and that learning to create with technology is one way that you can do this. So within CoderDojo, we are really passionate about not only just helping children learn the hard technical skills, so how to solve a problem or how to debug something, but the softer skills that they also learn through the informal learning environment that is created. So communication, perseverance, resilience, the ability to keep working on something even when it doesn't work, the ability to work with your peer who's sitting beside you to solve a problem together. And they are the skills and they are the competencies that no matter what that child or those children go on to learn will play a significant role in their development and in their ability to be great at whatever they do. The important thing to remember is that children just spend 25% of their time in formal education, so there's all this time outside school and outside the formal learning sector where they can be developing, where they can be working and building skills, and CoderDojo is one of the ways that they can do that. So the meta competencies that we encourage through the CoderDojo movement are adaptability and flexibility and problem solving. In terms of the CoderDojo model, to step back and actually explain what it is a global movement of free programming clubs for young people between the age of 7 and 17, although some dojos do have children who are 5 or 6 as well. The term dojo means temple of learning, so CoderDojo is about creating these temples or fun places for children to come and learn together. It is an Irish-originated movement. It was started by 2 people called James Welton and Bill Yao. And at the time, James was just 18. He was a self-taught programmer, and he deeply understood the isolation of that. It wasn't something that was taught in his school. None of his friends had an interest in technology, and he had been hacking away in his bedroom from about the age of 13. He became the first person in the world to hack into the iPod Nano, and he wrote a blog about it and gained a bit of notoriety. The police showed up on his door about it, apparently, or so the story goes. But he put it up on the website and it became huge. He also went on to win an award which was announced over the intercom in his school. He was doing his leaving cert or A-levels, the final high school exams at the time. And his principal announced, James Welton had just won this web development award. So lots of his friends came up to him and were like, how did you know how to build a website? That's so cool. I'd like to build a website. Can you teach me? So he started one club after school in his hometown in Cork in the west of Ireland. He then went on, he sat his final exams that year, and when he was leaving the school, he couldn't keep the club up. He was no longer a pupil of that school, it made no sense. So the club ended, and all the kids who had been learning how to build their own websites had nowhere to go. During that summer, he spoke at the Dublin Web Summit, which is a really big technology conference that used to happen in Dublin, it now happens in Portugal every year. And it was there that he met Bill Liao, who was an investor and a philanthropist, and he was also a self-taught programmer. So he really related to James about that isolation of learning this skill and having an interest that you didn't share with people. So James started telling him about CoderDojo, well, at the time it wasn't called that, but about this coding club that he had started in his school. And the two of them kind of got thinking, and they thought, actually, there's something to this. And that one computer club can be something much bigger, and that's where CoderDojo was born. So now there are over 1,550 clubs in 75 countries all around the world. From the beginning, the club was incredibly popular, and the two of them knew, James was going on to set up his own business. Bill had many different full-time jobs. He was involved in lots of different things. So neither of them were starting a charity or a foundation to support this club in Cork, but they knew there was demand. There was children traveling with their parents from 2 hours outside Cork to attend this club on a Saturday. So they decided to open source the model. And I always show this picture when I talk about CoderDojo being open source, because what that means is that anyone, anywhere in the world can start a dojo. You can start one of these clubs using the model, using the philosophies, and using the tools and supports available to reach and impact the children in your lives and in your communities. So what this image is, if you can't grasp it from the outset, but this is the CoderDojo logo, is the simple black and white yin and yang, which you can see various versions of that. But this image, excuse me, this image is a whole selection of the logos that individual clubs from around the world have taken and adapted to their context. So that shows you how open the model is. We encourage communities to adopt it to their locality. So you have CoderDojo Japan up in the top, and CoderDojo Tri-Valley in the States, and CoderDojo Scotland, and various different ones. So as I said, anyone can start a dojo once you agree to the basic principles that are laid out in the charter, and this says that it must be free. You do not charge children to learn, to attend in your dojo. It is a free, voluntary-led club. It must be regular, so dojos only get verified by us if they meet weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly at a minimum, so you have to commit to running this club regularly to give children that outlet, that regular place to go and learn. And you have to encourage the CoderDojo philosophy, which really says you should encourage peer learning, children to work with each other. You should encourage the children to learn by themselves, to self-direct their own learning. It's non-curriculum based, so they should be, you might have a room with 30 children and they might all be learning HTML and CSS, but they're working on 30 different projects that they all care about. And you should also encourage youth mentoring, which is a big aspect of the CoderDojo model. So children to actually start mentoring and helping their peers. So there's 5 steps in starting a dojo, and each club in the world starts with a champion. So I am the champion of the Docklands Dojo, where Zara attends. You do not need to be a programmer to champion a dojo. I am not a programmer, I always get asked that. But the champions are essentially the project managers of a club. They might be a parent or a teacher, or they might be someone who works in industry and it's something that they would have loved when they were a child. So they start the club. They're the people who take that initial initiative to get this up and running. The second step is gathering your team. So you recruit a few people to actually join you on this journey and mentor the children. So again, you don't need to be a programmer or someone working in industry to volunteer or mentor at a dojo, although a lot of the volunteers in the community do come from industry and might be software engineers or technical support even. So they have the ability to work with the children. They see 60% come from IT, 20% are teachers or lecturers, and about 20% are students. So they might be studying computer science or similar at university. Last year alone, over 330,000 hours were volunteered in the CoderDojo movement around the world. We provide trainings and supports, all available online and open sourced, to people who are interested in volunteering. And this was something that we found out was incredibly important because a huge amount of our volunteers don't come from formal education. They haven't had the training that you have had as a teacher. So where they lack confidence is, oh God, how am I going to work with 25 kids? Like, are they going to listen? What are they going to do? So we've developed really short e-learning modules that teaches the volunteers the basic concepts of mentoring. So at a really basic level, you should not be standing where I'm standing and talking down at the entire club. You should be down at the kids' level. You should get down to their level. We have a whole host of mottos as well in the CoderDojo community. So if you haven't built it, you can't play it. So the purpose of these is to just give anyone interested in volunteering that initial confidence to just go and do it. Thirdly, you find a venue. So as I said, they are informal clubs. They happen outside of school hours, although they can happen in schools as a venue. Although if that is happening, we'd encourage, to change the layout of the room so it's not just like a child's going from class directly into the club. It should feel different. But a huge amount of these clubs happen in libraries, in canteens, in coffee shops, in hotels, in corporate offices are really popular, in boardrooms, really any space that has tables, chairs, maybe internet, although we have clubs that run without internet as well. And then you plan the dojo. So what day of the week are you going to run? What time? How long? What content do you want to learn with initially? And again, this is less about the specific languages that the children is learning to program with, but it's that process of learning how to program through building projects. But most commonly, clubs cover Scratch, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, Android app development. Hardware is incredibly popular, so both Raspberry Pis and Arduinos as well. That physical computing element has gotten really popular in the last few years. And then you verify and promote the dojo. So we verify at the foundation every single dojo in the world, and then they get listed on the global map, and they become part of the global community. Most people worry about where they're going to find the kids to attend their dojo, but of the 1,550 clubs in the world, no one has ever got in touch with us to say, no kids are coming to my club. That's always the last of the worries. So we always say start small. The average club has about 30 young people in it, although we do have really big clubs that have 150 kids that come every single Saturday. They're the Irish ones where we started, so the Irish are very proud that they have the biggest clubs. So this map illustrates the growth of CoderDojo by over the years and where it started. So it started initially in Ireland in 2012, and then it went to the US and Australia and Brazil. And then from there it scaled both around Europe, but also into Asia and parts of Africa over the years. So we are now in 75 different countries. Also in the community, we have what we call regional groups, which are where the number of dojos in a region reaches critical mass, and that then encourages the community to come together and organize themselves in a little more of an efficient way, and they become the representatives for CoderDojo in that region. One of our strongest regional groups is CoderDojo Japan, and they now have 130 dojos around Japan, and it's growing, and it's been growing ever since. And they run their own versions of DojoCon, which is a volunteer conference that we run every year. Just last week, James Welton, the co-founder, was in Japan attending that. And we also work with corporates as well in many ways, but one of the core ways is through growth partnerships, which is where we encourage corporates like Accenture or like Salesforce or like Microsoft or whoever it is to encourage their employees to start dojos. Lots of companies are looking for ways that their employees can give back through, corporate social responsibility and employee engagement strategies and schemes. So we always just say start dojos, and you have venues, you have employees, you have equipment, off you go. So Accenture now have 10 dojos around the world, and that was all based off one club that they started initially in Dublin. So our work, and who am I, and what do we do? So I am the executive director of the CoderDojo Foundation. So we were started 18 months after the CoderDojo movement came into existence. So James and Bill had started CoderDojo, and it had gotten really popular, and they open sourced it. And the number of clubs around the world started growing and growing, but there was no central support to support these clubs or to encourage that growth in the community. So together, myself and James started the foundation, and I became the first employee in January 2013. We now have a team of 11 people. Not everyone is on that slide. And our work is focused on 4 core areas. So scaling enablement, so the community support, content creation. So although it is non-curriculum based, we create content to make it easier for volunteers to start their clubs. And also we work on the community platform, which is the tool and the infrastructure that we've built to help you run your club. When I started the foundation with James nearly 4.5 years ago at this point, what I actually spent the first 6 months doing was, no joke, clearing down emails and inboxes. There was a number of different inboxes that had been set up and no one was monitoring them. So what I did was respond. Probably about 3 months I spent literally responding to thousands of emails from people all over the world who wanted to know more about CoderDojo. So the community support element there is a big, big part of our work. We respond to anyone in the world within 24 hours if they want to know more information about CoderDojo, if they have a challenge or a concern or a problem, or they just want to be pointed to a resource. So one of the big areas that we have been working on earlier this year is around diversity in dojos. And I think everyone can agree that the world deserves more diversity. And that is not just in relation to gender, although gender is a big part of that, but also socioeconomically, ethnically as well. So what we noticed was that each year, the percentage of girls in CoderDojo globally was not increasing. So it's roughly about 30% of attendees are girls around the world. And that was a direct correlation to the percentage of female volunteers in the movement, which is really interesting. So we hear a lot about role modeling, and you can't be what you can't see, and until we have more women leaders and more women presidents and prime ministers or business leaders, we won't have more women in those positions. And the same goes for IT and for STEM and engineering and computing. Until there are more women in the industry, it's very difficult to encourage the next generation to take up those jobs, because they don't associate it with themselves and they don't think that it's something they are capable of. So earlier this year, we launched the CoderDojo Girls Initiative, and the purpose is, our goal is to increase the percentage of girls in CoderDojo from 29% to 40%. And we believe that when we get to 40%, then we will be at tipping point, and hopefully in the future we won't need girls initiatives because it's just going to be more equal. But until then, so what we're doing, a lot of it is to do with showcasing role models. We are looking at the content that we create through a lens of diversity. We're sharing best practices, we're conducting research, and we're just communicating the need. So in terms of sharing best practices, this is our Empowering the Future guide, which we released in October to coincide with International Girls and ICT Day, which is a UN, or no, International Day of the Girl, which is a UN day. So what this guide does is we collected best practices from clubs all around the world, and we've distilled them down and created this guide. So this guide goes through best practices that you can implement in your dojo. Anyone can get this guide on our website, but it makes for a really interesting read, because I do believe that some of these best practices can be adapted to whatever it is, if they're not just related to CoderDojo, but in general, if you're trying to get more girls into STEM-related activities. So one of the ones which I already mentioned is role models. Try and make sure you have female volunteers in your club, because that will help not only the kids and the girls, but the parents trust it a bit more. Content, we analysed the projects that girls had created and entered into our Global Coolest Projects Awards, which I'll talk about again in a minute. And we found that there is no real differences between the technologies that girls are using and boys are using, but what there is a difference in, and there was a big piece of research conducted by CoderDojo Scotland on this, is that girls prefer stuff that are more real world applicable. They don't want to just code for the sake of coding. They want to solve problems. They want to understand the real world application of what they're doing. And also the language that you use. So CoderDojo Scotland analysed all of the event web pages of all of the dojos that had taken place in Scotland over a 4-year period, and they categorised them. So were they using jargon, or were they giving specific examples? And they found that event invitations, so this goes with the content that you use to promote any event, if you're more specific, if you don't use jargon, then the girls are more inclined to come because they're less put off by it. The other work we do is around our Zen community platform, so we make it easier for people to find dojos online, and we make it easier for people to start dojos online by guiding them through that process. And the content development, so we create a lot of content in sushi card format. You might notice a theme with our work. So sushi cards are essentially single-sided concept cards covering a whole host of different programming languages, from HTML to JavaScript. And the idea is that each individual card can be picked up by itself, and a child can learn that programming principle. So although they go in a series, they don't necessarily have to be followed. So for example, in the HTML beginner sushi series, one card might be editing a web page. Another card might be embedding a video. Another might be building your nav bar, those kind of things. So they, depending on what that child is working on, they can just pick up what they want to learn. So this slide is a bit old because we're now actually 6 years old, but as of the end of last year, over 1 million volunteer hours had been volunteered by volunteers all around the world. It's now over 150,000 young people have been impacted by the CoderDojo movement, and it's 75 countries. The CoderDojo has won various awards and been recognized by people such as Europe Code Week and the World Summit. We became the global education winner of that last summer. James Welton became an Ashoka Fellow, won Social Entrepreneurs Ireland awards as well. So the impact of the movement is really important, but it's also incredibly challenging to measure when you're dealing with an open source community. How do we actually measure the impact that the movement is having on each child that goes through the community? What we did to start this is our first ever Ninja survey. We did a pilot of it in July 2016, and then we did the first proper survey in June of this year. These results are just from the pilot, which we did with about 30 children who had attended one of the 10 first clubs in the world. And of them, 90% of the young people want to or are already studying computer science or STEM-related subjects at university. 59% of them said that attending CoderDojo influenced and changed their perception of technology, and that they realized it was more accessible than they previously thought. And 80% of them now mentor at a dojo, which I love. That's one of my favorite statistics. I think it's incredible that children who are benefiting from it, from the CoderDojo movement, are then going back and giving back and mentoring at the movement. So what we do know is that CoderDojo is changing the perceptions of the young people who come to the movement. And we also know it's difficult to challenge the impact because it's difficult to have control groups in a volunteer movement, and there's lots of different factors that influence this. Earlier this year, we announced that we were joining forces with the Raspberry Pi Foundation, which I thought I would touch on very briefly here. So Raspberry Pi, for anyone who isn't familiar with it, is a UK headquartered charity. They are most well known for manufacturing, for making the Raspberry Pi computer, which is a small $35 computer. But they actually are, they're not a computer company, they are a computer company, but they are an educational foundation, and their purpose is much broader. It's to put the power of digital making into the hands of people all over the world. So any profits generated from the sale of the computer go back into the foundation and go back into their educational programs, which include now CoderDojo, of course, but also teacher training and various other programs like that. So the coolest projects, which I've mentioned before, is the only event of its kind, and it's essentially a science fair, but for CoderDojo. And next year we will be opening it up to children from outside CoderDojo as well, which is hugely exciting. It's been running for 6 years, and next year it's happening on the 26th of May in 2017. And essentially children from CoderDojos all around the world, they build projects and then they present their projects at this event. What's really special about Coolest Projects is that it encourages children to work their way through this creative cycle that they don't normally do in day-to-day kind of formal education programs. So the first step is they think of a project, and their project can be on absolutely anything. And they then build that project in their dojo, and they test it with their peers and with the mentors, and then they showcase it at the Coolest Projects Awards. But then we encourage them to go back and refine it or launch it. And we've had lots of successful apps go onto the app stores after Coolest Projects. But what we really encourage is for children to come back each year and to come back and build new projects or refine existing projects. There is a video there, which I'm not sure if you're going to be able to play, but if you press that video, I'll see if it works. So this video is from the 2016 Coolest Projects, and it just shows some kids talking about the projects that they've built to give you an idea.
I think it's just a brilliant opportunity for kids to have fun in a very safe environment, achieve something, learn something. It really amazes me that to see what kids come up with and to see the lateral thinking and the out-of-the-box thinking that you see.
There's a lot of boys and girls. There's a lot of different things you can do there, so there's lots of people in different groups.
Well, when I went on the very first day, I didn't really know what it was going to be about, but when I went in, I loved the fact that you could make anything, that your imagination was the limit.
My project is 10-second camogie. You have to get as much goal as you can in 10 seconds. The project is 1916 meets 2016, and it's a big GPO in Lego, and we've added loads of electronics to it in Arduino.
Well, I'd say it's a great hobby to have and a great skill. It's easier to program now. At first I didn't have a clue to do it, and now I'm getting the hang of it, so it's a lot easier.
Project is a site named Coding Girls. It's proposes to encourage girls to start coding.
The children come to us with an abundance of ideas, and we help them to actually get those ideas and make things with them.
It's very good to learn how to make your own games and program stuff.
Well, I like CoderDojo because not only that I love programming, but it's one of my hobbies, and also I love robotics.
We try and focus them on making something and then making that something better.
And it's just been a really cool experience.
So as you can see in the video, the children are all working on different projects that they care about. So for one girl, it was camogie, and for anyone who isn't Irish, you won't have a clue what camogie is, but it is a native Irish sport, kind of like hockey, but more complicated and probably more dangerous. And her game, she plays camogie, so her game was all about that and sharing her hobby. And for another, for a teenage girl, it was about building a project to inspire more girls to learn how to code it. So it is open to anyone in the CoderDojo community. Last year we had over 700 projects that were built by 1,000 kids. Over 13,000 people came on the day to see these projects. And we had children from over 17 different countries. So people came from Argentina, and we had one kid come from Australia, and one girl come from North America. So it's a really special event. What we're really excited about, my clicker isn't working, but anyway. What we are really excited about next year is that we're going to have regional versions of the event. So we're going to run a smaller one in the UK and a smaller one in North America as well. That will feed into the global event. So they're just some of the stats from last year. So in terms of where we want to get to, our 2020 goal is to have 5,000 active dojos. I need to up my 75 country figure because we're already there. And we want 150,000 young people to be regularly coding in dojos around the world. And we hope that by the end of 2020, there will be more than 40% of young people in the movement will be girls as well. So the only way that we can do that is if more people get involved, if more people volunteer, and if more people mentor at clubs. So as I said, anyone can support the community, they can start a club, or they can join an existing club by volunteering. Thank you.
네, 지금까지 소프트웨어 교육 기부에 관한 코더도조의 야심찬 비전을 들어볼 수 있는 의미 있는 강연이었습니다. 전무님 감사합니다.